When today's property was constructed, no one knew the dark history of scandal, horrors and regret that would encompass it. Why, you might wonder? Well, maybe it was because it was built on a burial ground, one that was soaked in blood and war. Hey there, dissectors. In this episode, we're going to delve into the paranormal events that take place at Sorrel-Weed House in Savannah, a home where spirits lingered even before the first brick was placed. From April 19th, 1775 to September 3rd, 1783, the American Revolutionary War took place. In that time, a fight broke out across Madison Square, also known as the Siege of Savannah, as American and French forces tried to get the British out of the area. As the Revolutionary War was struggling with being outmanned and outgunned, the dead started to pile up. Hundreds died in just a matter of weeks, and at the peak, a pit was dug for bodies to be thrown in. Only they didn't just bury the dead. People who were injured and sick also ended up in the pit, often being buried alive. But what happened to the dead after the war was over? Were they dug up and given the proper burial they deserved? The answer to that is a resounding no. The bodies were left there, and while life struggled to go back to normal, Madison Square and surrounding areas started to expand and built many buildings, including today's property, on top of dead soldiers. People have described an intense dark energy at Sorrel-Weed House that even spreads out over Madison Square. In the property, it seems to stem from the basement, with many believing the energy comes from the hundreds of dead soldiers. The feeling creeps into your bones, making you feel on edge as something paranormal watches you. There are even the sounds of screams, shouting and gunfire heard echoing late at night, especially on evenings when everything seems quiet, as the deceased soldiers make themselves heard once again. Don't you think it's terrible though? You give your life, your devotion to a cause, and then when you've given all that you can, you're not even given the decency of a burial or even your identity back. So, the ground that Sorrel-Weed House was built on was already soaked in blood. How could it get any worse, you might wonder? Well, Francis Sorrel was a West Indian plantation owner who would one day become one of Savannah's richest men. As a young boy during a slave revolt, his family was forced to run and he nearly lost his life in the process. He was only saved by slaves who refused to take the life of a boy so young. After this encounter, you would think he would never go near any business that involved the slave trade, but you'd be wrong. Greed seems to have been a great motivator, as after working the docks for a period of time, he was transferred to the United States, where he eventually opened a shipping company. Francis shipped all kinds of things, from butter, salt, cotton, and even African slaves. As business grew and grew, so did Francis's wallet, and in time, he decided to purchase a home that would reflect his status. So in 1837, architect Charles Kluski set about building the Sorrel-Weed House, but after its completion, it didn't take long for heartbreak to fill the home. You see, not long after moving to the United States, Francis met a young woman called Lucinda Moxley, as he did business with her family. After a short romance, the couple married, but only a few years later, the poor woman died. Not wanting to be alone, and probably due to his public image, he remarried quite quickly. But the shocker was that he married the younger sister of his wife, called Matilda. For a time, the couple seemed to have a happy marriage, but then Francis started to look in other places to satisfy his appetites. Maybe it was out of a sense of power, or was it possible he had a sadistic streak in him? Whatever the case, Francis began an affair with a young slave girl named Molly. Now let's be real here. It's quite likely that Molly wanted nothing whatsoever to do with the master of the house. But if you're faced with a powerful man who is capable of using his authority to get what he wants, what else are you going to do? You might turn around and think, well, sod him. I will take whatever punishment he wants to dish out. But it wouldn't have been just you hurt. Often it was your family too. Wanting to make sure that his private time with Molly was exactly that, he gave the young girl her own room. Maybe it was this that caused Matilda to discover her husband's secret. Now, heartbroken, humiliated and enraged, the young wife climbed to a second-floor balcony and jumped. Considering that her body is described as landing head first, with her skull cracking open on the concrete floor below, I would say she didn't so much jump as let herself fall backwards. Poor Molly was already suffering at the hands of her abusive master, And now, to discover that her mistress had not only found out, but had killed herself, was more guilt than the young girl could endure. Especially as Frances would not be held accountable. All blame would be put on the poor slave girl for not only the affair, but Matilda's death too. In a heartbreaking turn of events, Molly's body was discovered hanging by a noose in what appeared to be another suicide. There are many who think, though, that it's more likely the other slaves took matters into their own hands and killed her out of shame and fear that there might be some retaliation on them. As it is quite often the case, brutal and sudden deaths can leave spirits feeling confused, or even like they have unfinished business. Both Matilda and Molly are said to haunt Sorrel-Weed House as their dark shadows walk the hallways and follow guests around. While some visitors have claimed to have taken photographs of the spirits, many have also seen the reflection of a young woman, quite likely Matilda, staring out from a mirror. Why is she haunting the mirror? Could it be that she spent time in front of it, questioning why her husband needed someone else? Was she not enough? Had she done something wrong? These all seem like quite likely thoughts to have gone through her head. As anyone who's been cheated on knows, you can often tear yourself apart with questions and self-hatred. Well, imagine that in a time where men were thought of as man of the house and women were just property. Her feelings would have been squashed down, with importance being put on public appearance. And in the old slave quarters, the spirit of Molly is said to still linger. One man is said to have rented that space as an office at some point and felt a constant uneasiness in his time there, as if someone was watching, judging his every move. Which makes sense, as after what she endured in life, it seems quite likely that Molly would have a deep distrust of men. Other visitors to this location have also complained of feeling drowsy and sick to their stomachs. Could these be the emotions felt by poor Molly as she died? There is also the sensation of being strangled, with the sound of the rope creaking heard by many. Visitors to the Sorrel-Weed House have experienced more than the ghostly entities of the poor ladies and even the deceased soldiers. Guests to the property have mentioned hearing the sound of a large gathering in the living room of the property, almost as if a party is taking place. But as you get closer to the room, the sound suddenly stops, like the entities are trying to keep their gathering away from prying eyes. If you decide to visit this fabulous historic building, please be prepared for problems with any of your electrical equipment. Visitors have experienced a full cell phone battery draining away in a very short space of time to no battery at all, which makes it difficult for anyone wanting to catch footage of the paranormal. So as you can see, dissectors, this house has witnessed many tragic deaths. So be prepared if you're walking around the streets of Madison Square or this home, because if you listen closely, you may hear disembodied footsteps close behind you. Until next time, as always, stay safe out there.